Good afternoon. My Algonquin name is Wamsi, and I hope you are all well. And I feel honored and privileged to share in this celebration of a great man who inspired many of us. As James has already indicated, I'm filling in, which is very hard to do, for a long-time friend of Kirk's, Elder William Commanda. He has sent a letter, and this letter is up on the Canoe Museum website, so you can read the whole thing. I'm going to touch on a few excerpts, add a few words of my own. I should also mention to you, I'm an Algonquin from Shabbat in Eastern Ontario. I also serve as an Ontario Human Rights Commissioner, and in that, I mention that because it is part of this story as well. I'm going to just start with this. Kirk Wipper lived his entire life on a large stage, a moving stage, and it is challenging to confine the breadth of it all to words. He himself was a master of words, his own and the words of many others. He told a friend once that he was bullied as a child, and hence he stayed in class at recess and memorized poems. It is fitting that so many rhymes form part of a tribute to his life, for they were deeply integrated into his particular sensitivity and outreach to youth and to all others whose paths intersected with his. William Commanda, Algonquin elder and founder of the Circle of All Nations, and I, this would be Ramola, participated in the opening of the Canoe Museum in September 2001. And that was when I began to know Kirk Wipper better. And in this tribute to him, I shall reflect chiefly on the last decade of his life and his growing and passionate engagement in the work of the Circle of All Nations. Kirk Wipper came and started buying them directly from us. These are William's words. And he's talking about, and actually I had the honor and privilege of talking at length with William about this story, which I'd be happy to share with you later on. So Kirk came and he started buying them directly from us, from all the Indians. And that is when we started to have the idea to collect all the canoes he was buying and put them all together. And so he became the creator of the Canoe Museum. That is why he became best friends with us, maybe 50 years ago. The canoe and the spirit of the nomad were imprinted on Kirk early. The seeds for the journey of reconciliation with the indigenous heritage of this land were planted, and they hastened towards maturity at the end of his life. Our activities commemorated, celebrated, and advocated for environmental and especially water stewardship, culture and heritage, racial harmony, and respect for indigenous wisdom. More than that, they celebrated the marvelous gift of life and diversity. As it was at one of these events that Kirk was honored by the grassroots Wolf Project for his commitment to racial harmony and peace building. In circles predominated by indigenous elders, Kirk took his place as a highly respected, endlessly funny, and dearly loved grandfather and friend. He will be sorely missed, but we are sure stories of his engagement with so many of our friends, young and old, will animate our circle discussions for years to come. And finally, our tribute embraces Kirk's large circle of family and friends who joined him on the stage of his personal drama and found their lives transforming at these points of engagement, and also became our friends. And our tribute embraces most especially Anne. Her deep grace, patience, love, passionate interest in William's work complemented and supported Kirk's, but always reflected a poise, focus, and centeredness entirely her own. She helped him engage in the journeys of his last years with increasing compassion, and we love you and hold you in our heart. Sincerely, William and Ramola. I'm just going to add a few observations of my own. I know as I participated in those elder circles as well. But what we observed was that Kirk was one of those unique individuals, along with Anne, who understood the messages embraced in the wampum belts, for example. In the wampum belts, one of them, there are three figures. On one side are the French, and the other side are the English. And in the middle, leading the way in terms of understanding the relationship with Ginawe-Daganuk, the web of life, was the Indigenous voice. And that partnership and the opportunity of reconciliation that we are faced with now in 2011 was something that Kirk articulated, understood, and expressed and shared with William. And that gift, that articulation, that painting with words from his heart was so important, and so important in the journey of life here in Canada that we are all on our way in taking. And it's their words, that understanding, that's a foundation and an inspiration for all of us. And for that I say to Kirk and Anne, Chigimigwech. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I remember one time my dad asked if I would speak at his funeral, and I agreed because he thought he would outlive me. My dad used to write all my speeches for public speaking competitions, and I would win. I miss his words now. Dad was a wonderful father and exposed us to adventure. One of the many wise things Dad taught me was it was about the journey when you travel, not the destination. As a result, family trips were long. We knew every back road, and the word lost did not exist. One fond childhood memory was our first trip to Lake Lady Evelyn, where Dad purchased Garden Island. It was a family event. Dad, Mom, Doug, David, our dog Scamp, and I piled into the Wipper wagon. We were towing a motorboat, a foreign object to us. We arrived at Mowat's Landing with a new motorboat in tow and a 17-mile ride to the island ahead of us. While putting the boat into the lake, something snapped, and the boat on the trailer went into the lake together and sank. After fishing out our new motorboat and trailer, we learned that the trailer had punched 2 holes in the bottom of our motorboat. Dad jumped into action, finding pine tree gum and bark to make patches. Several hours later, we arrived at Garden Island. We had planned a steak dinner. Instead, we ate bread and cheese. In the middle of the night, Dad woke us up. We stumbled outside to see a sight I shall never forget. A painted sky, colors streaming in all directions. To this day, I've never experienced a display of northern lights like that. I am thankful to have shared that memory with my dad. As Dad would say, all is well that ends well. Dad inspired all who knew him, made everyone feel special. We were lucky to share him for a while.
So I'm from the home of the Blackberry, Waterloo. It's kind of amazing because people in the States sometimes don't understand that. Our director of the police was down to Texas, and when he was there in Texas, this was a big FBI conference and a lot of high-profile police and so on. And one of the policemen came up and he said, I got the secret device. He says, it's really, really scary. He said, it's fantastic. He says, would you have any of these up there in Canada? He says, I come from Kitchener. It's adjacent to Waterloo. So we have 2 billionaires in Waterloo now. They started the Blackberry 15 years ago. Anyway, I'm here to say a few things about, I can't really call him a friend because I didn't know him that well. I had a few experiences, a couple interactions, and I'm going to just speak briefly about those 2 interactions. In 1952, and a guy called Rod Jack left a place called Listowel on a steam locomotive. You would remember that when I look at the crowd in front of me. At least some of you would. And, there were not a lot of diesels at that time. They were all steam. And we went through Palmerston, and we went to Toronto, changed trains, and then we went right through downtown Lindsay at about 2 miles an hour, and then on up through the bush country. That train moved so slowly that those kids that were with me that were going to camp, 16-year-olds like myself, could get out and walk along the side. And there was a water cooler in the train. We could actually throw water around with each other. So we had a pretty good time. So anyway, when I got to Irondale Station, the person that greeted me at the station was a guy who was big and strong and muscular. And I thought he was about 8 feet tall at that time. His name was Kirk Wipper. And throw your stuff in the back of the stake truck, and we went in the Bark Lake Road, where you had to duck for all the tree branches because it wasn't manicured like it is now. My mother, when I left Listowel, was worried and cried because she had heard about the bears in the north and things like that. But I thought it was a great opportunity, great experience. So we got into camp, and I enjoyed 3 weeks of, I was going to say endurance, but I changed that word to pleasure, because boys do like boot camp, and that's what it was at that time. It was a highly structured program of swimming, canoeing, campcraft, as well as a 3-day canoe trip that went up through an old town called Donald that had a lot of old structures, and then back to camp. And for a kid who had spent his summers on the sandy shores of Lake Huron, Halliburton was quite an experience. One of the camp games that Kirk had us play was called Wallow, W-A-L-O, or Water, Air, Land Orienteering. Some of you probably know it. During the land part, each team had to transport a box containing toilet paper across Canoe Bay, and they were to keep it a dry cargo. Remember, no tools, no materials, just what we could find on the beach. And so it was a fair challenge for each of us to get that box across. Now, really, the essence of that activity was the intrinsic rewards the individual receives from completing the challenge. The only extrinsic reward was dining hall recognition. No big trophies, nothing special. Tate McKenzie would have referred to it as the joy of sport. For Kirk, the value of competition was the informal development of leaders and followers, both of which are important. So, Kirk knew from his training in wrestling at the University of Toronto that you also learn a lot by not winning. Now fast forward to 2007, because I only have 30 seconds left. When David Spencer organized a gathering of old staff friends at the former Ontario Camp Leadership Centre, where I spent 12 summers, also known as Bark Lake, a guy called Gordon Wright, who had started the camp back in the 48s. At one time it was a Bowmanville training school camp, but it got elevated to maybe something a little bit higher up the ladder. Anyway, Gordon Wright and a few others of us attended this session, and Kirk, of course, arrived the night before, stayed half an hour, talked a bit, and then left. And of course the meeting was until the next day. Anyway, one of the things he talked about that night at 11:30 was the Canoe Museum. And he talked about the challenges in setting up the museum. He said, one thing that I learned in bringing those canoes from the United States to Canada was that prints are more important than money. Judging by Kirk's friends, he's a billionaire.
bunch of notes, but I'm going to kind of leave them alone. Matt.
Okay. Well, can you hear me now, eh? As James said, I was one of Kirk's students at U of T. So the first recollection I have to share with you about Kirk is the first time we went to Candelore. We did an outdoor project the second fall, and I don't know if everybody knows where Candelore is, but up on 35 there, and driving along, and he meets us in Halls Lake, stops the bus and pulls us off 2x2, hands us a compass and a bearing. Says, everybody know how to use a compass? Some of us did, some of us didn't, so he made sure we did. He said, now find it. I don't think we lost too many, but anyway. The second recollection I have of Kirk is from U of T. Kirk was, he was a legend at U of T. He was, I heard somebody mention 8 feet tall. All I remember is that bear grip paw of his when he shook your hand, and it's kind of like, hey, have I got all my fingers back? But he was always welcoming. He had an open door policy. If you had a problem, Kirk was usually who you searched out. I probably had more problems than most because I was there so much. But Kirk did have a way of getting us involved. Kirk would say things like, you ever thought of, building a log house? Yeah. Well, we're doing this course up at Candelore with Alan Mackey. Wow, I'd really like, he's good, I signed you up. Or he'd say stuff like, you like wood canvas canoes? By the way, I'm supposed to be talking about not just canoes, so I am going to talk about that. But he'd say, do you like wood canvas canoes? And I'd go, yeah. He goes, you ever heard of a Gates canoe? Gates, no. Harold Gates, one of the finest wood canvas builders. You got to see his stuff. We're getting one of his canoes, probably the last one he made. No, I guess I have to see that. He said, how'd you feel about picking it up? I thought it was in Ontario. If you don't know where Harold Gates was from, it was Nova Scotia. Kirk was more than just about canoes. We all know about his involvement in the camping movement, Royal Life Society, Duke of Edinburgh. I mean, all of that's been listed, and I won't go over that. Maybe somebody else will, but I won't. But what I do remember about Kirk is that he made you believe in yourself. I got hired by Kirk as a staff member of Candelore. I showed up with a paddle under my arm, life jacket, sleeping bag, and a bunch of clothes. And I got there, and there was people like Wendy Grader, Fred Loosemore, George Anderson, Terry Thomas, that sort of group. And they kind of looked at me and went, what are we going to do with you? And I said, well, I can paddle. Okay. I had a goon stroke, not a J stroke. That's how bad I was. But Kirk had always taught me to kind of, stick with it and take advantage of the opportunity. And I did. And I'm glad of that. And Kirk talked to us about how important the wilderness was, and that was important. Preservation of the wilderness. He was also the reason that I chose to go into the field of outdoor education. He was able to direct me in that direction to a program at Queen's. The last few years, I hadn't really seen him. I bump into him now and then at different conferences, or, hear about him. And my dad passed away in September of 2009, and I guess when that happens, you kind of start to reflect on things. And I decided it was time that I look up Kirk, and I did. And I'd heard all sorts of things about, he's slowing down and everything, right? So I brought him a couple of walking sticks that my dad had made. And we met up at the house in Keene and sat down for a few seconds, and I do mean a few seconds, because with that, Kirk is up and he's gone. going from room to room, sharing about all the different things. And I mean, an able-bodied person was hard-pressed to keep up with him. But Kirk was like that. He was in front of many of us. He led the way for many of us. And I'd like to just share one quick thing, if I could. And that is, when I think of leadership, I think of a V of geese. And if you think of that V of geese, there's one goose that's always in the front, and it kind of breaks the wind current for the others that drafting in behind, and that allows them to kind of follow along easier. But if you watch that V of geese long enough, that lead goose will drop back and another one will take its place. So to me, a good leader is two things from that. One, it's somebody who sticks his neck out, and Kirk did that, whether it came to collecting canoes or the Royal Life Saving or camps or whatever. You lead the way. But also you let somebody, when they're ready, you let them take that lead. And I came from Candelore and I came from phys ed, and I know there's others that have come from other areas that Kirk touched probably as much or more than the impact he made on my life, but it was all the same, because he always let us spread our wings and take that lead. I have two quick poems. I know we were only supposed to talk 3 to 5 minutes. I have no idea how long I've been up here, and I do have a tendency to prattle on. But there was a young woman that wrote a poem. The reason I'd like to read this is her name is Fiona Ramsey. Fiona is involved with Badger Paddles. The paddle that you may have seen that was signed, that was donated. Badger also donated another paddle, which you'll learn about later. She was also she's an artist, and Kirk had commissioned her to do a couple paddles for him, one which was a reproduction of the Bill Mason stamp. So she wrote the following, and she wasn't able to make it, and she asked me if I would share it. This is about canoes, so it kind of deviates from what I was supposed to be talking about. Called The Man in the Canoe. There once was a man, a keeper of the wilderness. There once was a canoe, also a keeper of the wilderness. There once was a meeting of these spirits. The man in the canoe became brothers. This man revered his brother, and the canoe made many friends. The man and his friends made a special home for the canoe. They found him shelter. They made him a museum. They honored the canoe. The canoe was grateful to his brother. The canoe's friends were grateful to his brother. For without that man who shared his view from the stern, the canoe would be lost, forgotten by the masses, and without the canoe by which we lived, our heritage would be lost, our wilderness forgotten. Without the canoe, we could not be Canada. And without this man, we could not be who we are still today, Canadian canoeists. And that was by Fiona Westner Ramsey. I'm going to finish with my own poem, because it kind of sums up everything I wanted to say. I found a poem online called Requiem for a Paddle by a gentleman by the name of Peter Gilchrist. And I kind of reworked it, so this is what I can. Many times we have sat in the wood smoke of morning as the sun searched out our camp. We would have felt the touch of a creator. A creator conceived these special wild places. Places you shared and taught us about. You taught us to know, to care, and to act for the environment. About the 3 W's of woodsmanship: water, woods, and wilderness travel. You made us aware of the need for traveling gently on the land. You stood for the wilderness, for its conservation and its preservation, that we had to believe in the wilderness for the sake of the whole planet. So many times we would have talked without speaking, moved with a knowing, often without knowing it first, always learning by doing, always striving to do the best at what we can, and doing our very best with what we had, believing in wilderness but also in ourselves, largely because you made us realize we could and could never go wrong by doing so. You taught us to dream, never to be afraid to attempt the impossible, to inspire others as you inspired us. So now, whether it is in the stroke of our paddles or the footsteps over our portage, or the sound of the wind in the pines, or just the water on the rocks, taking a walk or a hike through the woods, or maybe just simply sharing stories while sitting around a campfire. It might be in places of learning, even in corporate boardrooms, or out beside a northern lake, in the meeting of former students, camp staff, colleagues, families, friends. Maybe at the Canoe Museum or up at Candelor. No matter where we may go in our quest for zest, you're with us every part of the way. I was part of the portage with this canoe, and I can tell you that Kirk was with us every step of the way. I want to thank Kirk for all he taught me and for you listening to these words. Big way.